and welcome back to Mini Fights. I'm Brian, and this is the fourth video in the Godtear series of painting Shayle. If you haven't watched any of the other ones and you'd like to start them in chronological order, click the link in the top right of your screen. That'll take you to episode 1. If you just feel like watching this one, go nuts. The step we're starting on here is we are just finishing up our non-metallic gold, and we are applying a cool tone, which it desperately needs because it is all warm tones to its detriment, really. The cool tones that we're adding is P3 Coal Black, which is essentially a phthalo blue as far as the pigment is concerned. That's a pigment that you can, it's kind of a turquoise color, and you can really work it in, and it's very transparent. So you can apply a little paint and then wet blend it out and still kind of retain the values and colors underneath it as well. So we're working in some of that as reflections in our gold. We're also using it a little bit as a shade here and there. I think arguably it was probably, this should have been a step we did earlier in this process rather than sort of adding it later, but it does end up working out pretty well. And we're going to go into Shayle and do the same thing, and we're just kind of applying it as a glaze next to the other dark areas of the gold. See here, kind of applying it next to that sort of reflection as well. It desperately adds a little bit of color contrast to the model. It's also going to contrast, or I should say it's going to tie together with Shayle's primary color, which is going to be, his robes are going to be based in a coal black as well. So we start slapping in our base coat onto Shayle, and you can see here he's got a real nice zenithal coat of primer on him. And had I really thought this through earlier, I probably could have incorporated this into the process, used maybe a thinner coat, or just applied the coal black to the kind of white raised areas. But I have to kind of blow it all out here with this coat of coal black, a pretty solid coat that's going to cover up all that value that we put in there. Not a big deal. We did it with an airbrush. It took about, I don't know, 2.5 seconds, but it is something that, with better planning, we could have incorporated. That being said, I don't necessarily plan paint schemes super well. I just have a rough idea going in on what I want, and then freewheel and figure it out. Sometimes that's great. Sometimes we come up with good results. Sometimes we have battles. And these models have been a little bit of a battle at times, but starting to come together nicely. After some deliberation, I decided that I want the runes on Landslide to glow. He needs a little bit more color, a little more visual interest. He's kind of really just kind of a two-tone guy right now, and I think the areas we have worked look good, but he needs one other thing to really get him to click. So I break out my white ink, my new toy, which I've used quite a bit on this project so far, just kind of finding uses for it. I thin it out with a little bit of Airbrush flow improver to make it flow nice. And we just kind of put it in all the runes that cover Landslide's rocky flesh. It's kind of an interesting process because we're not even really painting it. We're sort of filling the runes with the white ink and letting it just naturally flow. And if you don't use enough, it actually breaks up and there's kind of like little dark areas in it. So you got to kind of fill them. Which again, new thing, but we're trying new stuff. My plan here to all these YouTube videos is try new things. I'm always trying to add new stuff to my arsenal. So we're just doing it. We're seeing how it's going to come out. I was a little concerned that when it dried, it may not look as good as it does when it's wet, but it actually dried pretty similar. Now, this is not a new process for me. This is a classic color combination I've used many times. Coal black and P3 Umbral Umber. There's just something about those two next to each other that just, it's got the right amount of value shift, and it's got a beautiful color shift. You've got your warm and cool tones that really just visually are striking next to each other. So we're going to work this in kind of as a glaze, kind of as just a straight up just paint the shade in. And if we'd been smart earlier, we could have probably airbrushed him with Umbral Umber, done a zenithal of the white ink, and then sprayed the coal black over that, and could have gotten probably a similar result without having to do it by hand. That being said, the hand rendering I think comes out pretty good. So we're just going to move some paint around here and get it where we need it to be. Now that we've built up that shade where we want it, we're going to go back and address the trim. And I kind of have to just figure out what I think is trim and what isn't on this model. I decide that those two sort of, tabard maybe is the correct word, I'm not sure what you would call those, but those two tabard-like items that hang down his chest, that's going to be part of the trim. And we're doing that with Crick's Bane Highlight, which is a very light gray that's kind of got a warmness to it. And we're going to do a belt and some of the trim along his robes as well in this color. So I think we figured out mostly where that trim lies, and it surrounds the robe, runs down his chest, across the middle of the waist area, and we're just kind of cleaning it up here and making sure that everything looks good even from the side. This is going to be a time-consuming step, and it's going to eat a lot of the rest of this video. This is going to be the hand rendering of the cloak. I mixed ice yellow, which is one of my favorite highlight colors for all sorts of different colors. We're going to mix this in to coal black and build up our first layer. Now the plan here is to not use tons of layers. I don't generally build up, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, a zillion layers when I blend. Mostly what we're going to do here is we will kind of retroactively go back with coal black and blend some of the edges, the real stark edges of this highlight. But we're going to just lay it in right now. We're laying it in where the light would hit, leaving some of the base color of coal black to show through as we build up light. Big camera shake there, sorry about that. And you can see kind of what I'm talking about. The philosophy here is this is kind of the fat highlight on the robes. And we're doing more of the same on the back. The only real difference is that the folds of the robe tend to be kind of more in the same direction, in that diagonal away from his left arm kind of direction. So our cloak is now at a total of 3 layers. It's got the coal black mid-tone, the umber shade, and 1 highlight layer of coal black and ice yellow mixed together, about 50-50, something in that ballpark. Now, we're going to get to the step that should be everyone's favorite. It's definitely my favorite. It's the final highlight, and this is going to be majority ice yellow mixed with a little bit of coal black. This is where you get to kind of flex your muscles on, you know, knowing where the light should hit and kind of tying the room together and making sure that the area makes sense and that the viewer from some distance can see all the details of the various folds of the robe. These smaller areas on his shoulders and where the robe bunches up around his neck are very important. Make sure you're hitting those properly with the edge highlight, with the final highlight. Got to make sure that you allow the layers underneath to live. Don't erase them by applying the final light. Just add the final light next to them where it makes sense. Again, and one of the nice things about this, you can always go back and fix it. Your layers are not that complex. You didn't build up a million layers. There's not a bunch of wet blending necessarily involved. So you can go back and fix these layers pretty easily with your original mix. If you're using a wet palette, which I am not in this video, it's even easier. You'll have your original paint there. Another really important area is going to be the head. That kind of defined highlight line along the top of the head is very critical. There's a couple folds there as well. I'm going to make sure we get all that, build it up nice. And we are now just wrapping that step up, and that's going to wrap up this video. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the last installation of this series very soon.